9 unsolved mysteries linked to secret organized. The professional hit is the trademark of organized gangs, from the Mafia to the Hells Angels. Such murders are carried out to get rid of an inconvenient individual, or simply to send a warning to others in the criminal world. And because of the expert nature of such crimes, a disproportionate number seem to go unsolved.
1. John Fivera. 34 years ago on this day, tragedy struck in John Gotti's life. Gotti's youngest son, 12-year-old Frank Gotti, was run over and killed while striding on the minibike of a neighborhood kid called Kevin McMahon, near his parents' home in Howard Beach, Queens. The driver of the car, John Fivera, was a 51-year-old service manager at a Castro Convertibles furniture plant. He lived with his wife and 2 adopted children on 86th Street, directly behind the Gotti family on 85th Street. His son, Scott, was childhood friends with John and Victoria Gotti's oldest son, John Jr. On March 18, 1980, John Fivera was arriving home from work, when Gotti's son, Frank, darted in front of his car. He had not seen the minibike suddenly shoot out from behind a garbage dumpster until it was too late. Fivera told the police he was momentarily blinded by the sun, and did not see the boy. The crash was ruled an accident by the police, but not everyone saw it the same way. Frank Gotti had been the apple of his father's eye, the son for whom he had the highest of hopes. He was a promising student and athlete who enjoyed sports. His sudden death crushed John Gotti and drove his wife, Victoria, into deep depression, the same feeling that would soon visit the Fivera household. For days following the accident, John Gotti appeared utterly distraught, seemingly breaking down during his son's funeral and burial. The grief felt by Victoria, whose life was her children, was tinged by a bitter rage for the presumed carelessness of Fivera's driving. For weeks after the funeral, Victoria Gotti dressed only in black. In the Gotti living room, a picture of Frankie was hung over a backdrop of candles and flowers. A Queens detective who saw it called it a shrine. Almost equally broken-hearted was the hapless John Fivera. Not long after the accident, Fivera was subjected to death threats and harassment for months later. 2 days after the boy's death, an unidentified woman called the local police and said, "The driver of the car that killed Frank Gotti will be eliminated." That same day, Fivera found a written death threat in his mailbox. 2 weeks later, Fivera's car was stolen. It was found 2 weeks later abandoned on a street less than a mile away from his home. On another occasion, Fivera opened his mailbox and found a funeral card and a photograph of Frank Gotti, and the word murderer was spray-painted on his car. On May 28, John Fivera, a quiet family man, decided to visit the Gotti residence to apologize and to offer his condolences, was confronted by a wild-eyed Victoria Gotti who picked up a baseball bat and smashed Fivera over the head with it. After being treated for his injuries at a nearby hospital, Fivera and his wife, Janet, who died in 2000, put their house up for sale. On July 25, John and Victoria Gotti left for a week's vacation in Florida. Gotti explained that he wanted his grief-stricken wife to get some rest and relaxation. "My wife is still mourning my son, and I took her down there to get her mind of things," Gotti said later. 3 days later, on July 28, 1980, just 2 days before he was due to complete the sale of his home, John Fivera left the Castro Convertibles furniture factory at the end of his shift, and walked towards his car, which was parked beside a nearby diner, when he was confronted by a tall, heavy-set man who whacked him over the head with a club, knocking him unconscious. The assailant then picked up Fivera and threw him into the back of a blue van, and drove off, followed by a green car that had been parked in front of the diner with the van. Later, a third man drove Fivera's station wagon away. Neither John Fivera nor his car were ever seen again. He was officially declared dead 6 years later. The specifics of Fivera's actual death remain a mystery. On the day John Fivera was abducted, John and Victoria Gotti were conveniently 1,500 miles away in Fort Lauderdale, providing an alibi. When questioned by 2 detectives on Fivera's disappearance, John Gotti said, "I'm not sorry the guy's missing. I wouldn't be sorry if the guy turned up dead." His wife Victoria, when questioned, said, "I don't know what happened to him, but I'm not disappointed he's missing." He killed my boy." On August 5, 1980, FBI informant Billy Batista reported that Fivera's body would never be found. Accounts differ on what happened on the day of Fivera's abduction, and what happened to his body. On March 8, 2001, Jerry Capecci's Gangland News ran an exclusive account of the John Fivera disappearance. In the article, Capecci states that the story was put together from information from present and former law enforcement people who were connected with the case. Capecci identifies 8 crew members: Angelo Ruggiero, Willie Boy Johnson, Gene Gotti, John and Charles Carneglia, Anthony Rampino, Richard Gomez and Iggy Ligna, as having played a role in the abduction and slaying. It played out like this: as Fivera approached his automobile, he spotted the men and turned to run. John Carneglia dropped him with 2 shots from a .22 caliber, silencer-equipped pistol. Fivera gasped, "No. No. Please, my wife," as he struggled to get off the ground. Gomez, a former hood from Providence, Rhode Island, who had joined the Gotti crew in the late 1970s, cracked Fivera over the head with a 2x4, picked him up and threw him in a van. Another crew member took the victim's keys and followed in Fivera's car. Fivera and his car were driven to a salvage yard in East New York operated by the Carneglias. There Fivera's body was stuffed into a barrel, that was then filled with cement. While Charles Carneglia disposed of the barrel in the ocean off Brooklyn, his brother John crushed Fivera's car at the salvage yard. No one was ever arrested for the abduction and murder. In November 2004, informants led the FBI to excavate a parking lot in New York City suspected to be a mob graveyard, and the site of Fivera's body. While 2 bodies were found, Fivera's was not. During the week of January 5, 2009, Brooklyn federal court papers filed by prosecutors contained allegations that Gambino family hitman Charles Carneglia disposed of John Fivera's body in acid. Carneglia told a Gambino family associate, who is a government witness, that he disposed of the body by putting it in a barrel of acid, Assistant Brooklyn U.S. Attorney Roger Burlingame said. The mob associate, who was not identified in the court papers, but sources told the New York Daily News that it was Kevin McMahon, a mob wannabe close to Carneglia. Ironically, the minibike that Frank Gotti was riding on the day he was killed belonged to Kevin McMahon. The case of John Fivera has remained an unsolved mystery for 34 years and will continue to do so.
2. Jeffrey Bowen. March 2, 1994 will forever be marked as a watershed in the history of Australian crime. The murder of a police officer is a rarity in itself, but the ruthless, targeted killing of Detective Sergeant Jeffrey Bowen, and the alleged involvement of Australian, Italian Mafia makes it one of the most significant crimes in Australia's history. Sergeant Bowen was brutally murdered. Remarkably, a parcel bomb addressed to him slipped through the security net of the Adelaide office of the National Crime Authority, NCA. Bowen was a senior investigator with the NCA, and was exclusively involved with Operation Cerberus, the investigation into Italian organised crime in Australia. An important part of his team's brief was to report back to a federal government parliamentary committee to answer a simple question: does the Mafia exist in Australia, and if so, indicate to what extent. Bowen was certain that there was widespread Mafia presence in Australia, and was quickly learning the extent of its complex organizational web. His main focus was on the secretive Italian crime syndicate, 'Ndrangheta, whose origins formed in the heart of the province of Reggio Calabria. 'Ndrangheta's epicenter is centered on 2 small villages: Platti, which is often described as the heart of 'Ndrangheta, and San Luca, the soul or the cradle. Platti once had the dubious title of kidnap capital. The local criminals specialized in kidnapping family members of wealthy, northern Italian industrialists, and holding them in secreted caves in the mountains that shadow Platti. Proceeds from the ransoms were reportedly sent to Australia, and invested in the lucrative business of cultivating marijuana. In August 1993, a huge marijuana crop, 15,000 plants, in the Northern Territory was discovered following a multi-force agency investigation by authorities in Australia and Europe. Police described the extent of criminality involved with the crop as probably Australia's most complex. The 11 men who were charged were mostly of Calabrian descent. Bowen took control of the investigation, and concluded that Dominic Pr was the financier and organizer of the crop. A raid was made on Pr's home, and subsequently a charge was laid by Bowen against Pr for possession of an illegal listening device. The court date for the charge was set for March 3, 1994. Within 7 days of the fatal explosion, Dominic Pr was arrested for the murder of Bowen, and the attempted murder of Peter Wallace, an NCA lawyer who was seriously hurt in the blast. Police believed they had sufficient evidence for a conviction based on forensic evidence, and statements from Alan Chamberlain, an acquaintance of Pr. Chamberlain revealed to police that Pr had given him detonators and bomb-making magazines to hide for him. A week before his trial on September 9, 1994, South Australians were stunned when the Director of Public Prosecutions, Paul Rofe QC, decided to drop the charges against Dominic Pr via a notice of intention, nil prosequi, lodged with the Supreme Court. Operation Zoom was instigated and 2 undercover operatives came to Adelaide to infiltrate Pr's team. During this operation, the covert officers recorded Pr making statements regarding the bombing. Pr was recorded describing Sergeant Bowen as a piece of shit. Pr: "It's just that I had something to do with him before when he came in and trashed my place and arrested me, but I wouldn't know one from the other, you know. Because what they had done, believe me, I was upset. Sure, I wasn't fucking happy. Down the track they fucking annoyed me so much that I wish I had fucking done and taken out the whole fucking building, you know. Fuck them. The fucking bomb, I dream about it." Police raided the drug lab and Pr and 3 of his associates were arrested. After 12 months in remand, Pr pleaded guilty to charges that he was the architect and financier of the drug lab. In April 1999, Coroner Chivel led an inquiry into the death of Jeffrey Bowen. Over 50 witnesses were called before the court. Coroner Chivel shocked most observers with his summary. Chivel, in my opinion, however, the only reasonable inference to be drawn from the evidence is that Dominic Pr was responsible, in the sense that he constructed the bomb, and either posted it or arranged for someone else to post it, on his behalf to Detective Sergeant Bowen. Most observers thought that the bold statements by the coroner would lead to the arrest of Pr. However, the Department of Public Prosecution released a statement stating that they believed there was still insufficient evidence against anyone. Did he do it? When I began the research for this book, I was confident that I would be able to produce enough information for the reader to confirm my belief that Dominic Pr was the perpetrator behind the bombing in 1994. The more facts I dug out of the coroner's court files, the more clouded my views became, but I kept digging, trying to find the elusive smoking gun. Plenty of guns were found, some were warm but none of them smoking. I spent countless hours trawling through the 4,000 pages of transcripts and witness statements. Sitting in the reading room of the coroner's court, I have often felt both anger at this senseless crime, and immense sadness for Jeffrey Bowen's family, still grieving. At times, when I rested my eyes from reading, I would be distracted by a small metal stand in the corner of the room, which displayed an arrangement of pamphlets for visitors to read. Most were about coping with the loss of a loved one, from either suicide or murder. I contemplated on how many people have sat in this small room being consoled, shedding tears and trying to come to terms with the death of a loved one. Mourners' lasting question is always, why? What reason could provoke such a hideous crime as Jeffrey Bowen's murder? This was not an act of spontaneous violence in a moment of rage. The plan was meticulous. The weapon was absurdly brutal, and the result was so devastatingly evil. As a nation, why haven't we maintained the rage? Why have we let this crime linger in the ether? There have been 2 police reviews of this case, and on both occasions, no new evidence that could convict anyone has come to light, although there was talk that the last review uncovered a strong brief, but was rejected as not strong enough by the DPP. The Sapul media message is that the case is still open. In 2008, after the last review failed to uncover any new evidence, Jane Bowen's son spoke openly of the ongoing investigation. I always say that it is solved, but unresolved. I believe we know who is responsible, but sadly at this stage, he will not get what is coming to him. Did he do it? Almost everyone who knew I was writing this book would ask me this question. Who's he? I would reply. Of course, their questions were posed at Dominic Pr. I believe that the inquest summary from Coroner Chivel makes a compelling argument that Pr was indeed the killer of Bowen. However, A favorite saying of mine from Carl Jung reminds me of our human limitations. Knowledge rests not upon truth alone, but upon error also. So what happens now to arguably Australia's most important unsolved crime? There is $1 million reward for information leading to a conviction in Jeffrey Bowen's murder. I wrote to the SA Police Minister, Jennifer Rankin, suggesting the figure be lifted to $5 million, to entice a breakthrough in information. Ms. Rankin, after consulting Sapal, rejected this idea. Jeffrey Lee Bowen was a public servant who knew the dangers of his work but did it anyway. In Adelaide, we remember him by a somewhat camouflaged and unkempt small metal plaque on the footpath outside the building where he died. Thousands of Adelaide pedestrians pass it every week without a glance. In stark contrast, as you enter the town of Platy, the small Calabrian village that gave birth to the Ndrangheta Mafia clan, there is a large monument of a fallen police officer. Jeffrey Bowen deserves more. And as for Ndrangheta in Australia, as recently as June 2012, an Italian prosecutor, Ms. de Simone, warned Australia of its danger. The Ndrangheta is the organization that runs the international cocaine market. It doesn't do its business in Calabria but around the world. It has infiltrated all economic sectors and it controls voting and political candidates at a national and international level. I urge the Australians not to underestimate this organization. Otherwise it will be too late.
3. The murder of Don Hancock. This was an outstanding forensic investigation that showcases the work of highly regarded forensic professionals, who painstakingly carried out a world-class investigation. Most forensic investigations assist in either identifying offenders, or at the very least assist in convicting them. This investigation, however, did neither of that. The murderers of Lou Lewis and Don Hancock were charged with murder and associated offenses by detectives, who identified them through outstanding police work. The forensic evidence assisted investigators to demonstrate to the offenders that police had recovered large amounts of critical intelligence. This went to obtaining a confession from the offender Sid Reed and to convince a co-offender that the case against them was strong and professional. Bombings in Australia are rare, as are crime experts with experience in bomb crime scene examination. It is important to review cases, not only for posterity, but to reflect on some of the hard-earned experiences of others, so that good work is remembered and emulated in the event of a recurrence. This article is a review of the forensic work carried out by a team of bomb scene examiners from Western Australia, WA, police led by Sergeant Clayton Jack Benny into the homicides of WA Police Commander Donald Hancock and Mr. Lou Lewis. Although Senior Sergeant Benny had no formal training as a scientist, he applied scientific methodology in the search for better understanding of explosive effects of the bomb used to murder Don Hancock and Lou Lewis. David Royds has written this article as a training aid for aspiring bomb scene examiners. Don Hancock was a retired police officer who had served most of his career as a detective. He and his friend Lawrence Lou Lewis, a bookmaker, were killed by a bomb that had been planted in their vehicle was detonated as it approached Hancock's home at 6:36 p.m. on Saturday, September 1, 2001. Hancock, who had risen through the ranks to become the chief of the Criminal Investigation Branch, was also to become one of the state's most controversial police officers. He was best known for the investigation in 1983 of $650,000 worth of gold in the so-called Perth Mint swindle, which resulted in the jailing the McAlberg brothers. They maintained they had been framed. Hancock was also active in the pursuit of outlaw motorcycle gang, OMCG, members, running a public campaign against them. An incident occurred in the small mining town of Orabanda, near Kalgoorlie, where a member of the Gypsy Jokers OMCG, Billy Grierson, was shot dead by a sniper. The finger of suspicion was pointed at Hancock, however there was no evidence to support a charge. Hancock's subsequent death was widely seen as an act of revenge by bickies, and the death of Lou Lewis as collateral damage. The police investigation, known as Operation Zircon, had a breakthrough when a gang member called Sidney Reed implicated another member, the gang sergeant-at-arms Graham Slater, as the bomber. Reed admitted receiving the bomb from Slater, and planting it under the front seat of Lewis's car whilst it was parked outside Perth's Belmont Park racecourse. In company with Slater, He followed the vehicle to Hancock's home and, as it pulled up, he alleges that Slater dialed a number on his mobile phone, and whispered "Rest in peace, Billy" before the bomb went off. Reed was jailed for life with a minimum of 15 years, after pleading guilty to his part in the murders. He would also become the key witness at Slater's trial in the WA Supreme Court. The prosecution of Slater, however, subsequently failed after a vigorous assault upon Reed's character and reliability as a truthful witness. Whilst controversy and various conspiracy theories persist, the forensic investigation was thorough and detailed. It uncovered strong factual evidence that stands uncontested to this day.
4. Gus Greenbound. After the outfit whacked Bugsy Siegel, the Flamingo's next manager was Gus Greenbound, who started in the rackets with Al Capone, and who handled the wire service out west for the Chicago outfit. Greenbound was a master of the skim, the money stolen from the casino winnings before it could be taxed, and unlike Siegel, Greenbound was a professional. He was a man who could be trusted and depended upon. Greenbound did his job. The hotel was completed, and enlarged from 97 to 200 rooms. By the end of the year the casino posted a $4 million profit, $15 million before the skim, clearing the way for the skimming to begin. With that kind of cash flooding into the mob's offshore accounts, all of the mob families moved in to grab a piece of Las Vegas, but it was the Chicago outfit that built Vegas, and they did it with the cash, tens upon tens of millions of dollars, they took from the Teamsters' central pension funds. The outfit had sent Greenbound west to Phoenix, Arizona in 1928, to manage the Southwest division of its wire service, Transamerican. In the early 40s, he was moved to Vegas where he took over the Flamingo, after the Bugsy Siegel murder, and put the place in the black, within the first 6 months of his management. By 1950, Greenbound was widely recognized as the driving force behind the success of the $50 million Tropicana, as well as being known and respected in the underworld as a reliable source of information on Las Vegas real estate. Like Willie Bioff, Greenbound lived in Arizona, part-time, and was close to Barry Goldwater, then a Phoenix, Arizona councilman. In fact, Goldwater's family operated a branch of Goldwater's department store inside the Desert Inn, which was the excuse Goldwater used for visiting Vegas so often. After his phenomenal success at the Flamingo and the Tropicana, Greenbound was called in to put the Riviera Casino in the black after the place lost $5 million for its original investors. Greenbound didn't want the job, but Tony Accardo and Jake Kozak, the Chicago mob's money manager and technically, Greenbound's boss, personally flew out to Phoenix to try to persuade him to take the position at the Riviera. Greenbound heard them out, but turned the job down, because, he told them the strain of correcting the outfit's stupid mistakes was starting to take its effects on him. After 7 years on the hot seat, he had enough. He was tired, he was rich and he wanted to retire away from Vegas to Phoenix. Accardo and Kozak said they understood and returned to Chicago. A week later, Greenbound's sister-in-law was found murdered in her bedroom. The message was received. Greenbound moved back to Vegas to run the Riviera for a 27% interest in the place. This time he lasted only 3 years. In 1958 Johnny Rosselli, who was close to Greenbound, was told by Paul Ricca and Accardo to order Greenbound to step down. He was addicted to heroin, drunk when he wasn't high, running around with women half his age who stole from him, and was deeply in debt from gambling at the tables, losing up to $20,000 a week. Worst of all, he was skimming from the joint. Beyond, said Johnny Rosselli, what Mooney, Giancana, and the guys back in Chicago considered reasonable. Rosselli went out to Vegas and gave Greenbound the order. He was to sell his share in the Riviera to one of the outfit's frontmen and leave town. Do that, he could live. All past transgressions forgiven. But Greenbound refused. This town is in my blood, Johnny, he told Rosselli, and went right back to stealing from the skim. Then Marshal Caifano, Chicago's enforcer in Vegas, was sent in to handle the problem. On December 3, 1958, the police found Greenbound dead in bed. His throat was cut so completely that his head was almost falling off. Down the hall, in a different bedroom, they found Greenbound's wife's throat cut as well. She had been knocked out with a heavy bottle, which caved in the right side of her eye. Newspapers were piled around her to keep the blood from staining the carpet. The Chicago outfit, which, by mob standards anyway, normally showed a loyalty to those who served it, would have let Greenbaum's sins go. After all, he had made them a fortune, but Meyer Lansky had a piece of the Riviera and pushed for Greenbaum's demise. That was Meyer's contract, Johnny Rosselli said years later.
5. Theodore Roe. In the 1940s, the Chicago mob, which was known as the Outfit, was slowly but surely taking over the numbers racket in the Windy City. Eventually, however, one man stood in its way, Teddy Roe, a brash and cocky policy king, whom, like many of his compatriots in the Black Belt, Roe did not like or trust the white mob. The leader of the white mob's campaign to take over Chicago's numbers racket was Sam Giancana, a ruthless, nasty gangster who had no respect for black people. Roe regarded Giancana as a snake who had been thrown into the backyard of Chicago's Black Belt to cause harm. Born on August 26, 1898, in Galliana, Louisiana, the son of a tenant farmer, Louisiana, Teddy Roe moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, as a young boy. It's unclear whether he served in World War I, but by the 1920s, it is certain that he was still in Arkansas working as a bootlegger. In 1923, Roe married and moved to Detroit to work in the auto industry. After losing his job, Roe migrated to Chicago where he settled in the South Side and got a job working in a tailor shop that the Jones brothers owned. In reality, the shop was a front for their Harlem Bronx policy wheel where Roe worked as a full-time bookkeeper while pulling numbers on the side, at a drawing held at another policy wheel 5 blocks to the south on South Indiana. By the early 1950s, Roe was doing so well as a policy king, that he could spend $50,000 to decorate his flat at 5239 South Michigan. Teddy Roe had a fondness for the finer things in life. He wore custom-made suits, monogrammed silk shirts, alligator shoes, painted ties and wide-brimmed hats. Teddy Roe was a tough guy with a quick temper. He was mouthy, but he could back his rap with his fists, and he never backed down from a fight. Giancana got frustrated when he realized that sweet talk and intimidation, the carrot and the stick, would not work on the brash policy operator. Roe and Giancana butted heads several times. In 1945, for instance, Giancana tested Roe's mettle by trying to shake him down, warning him that Giancana had the full weight of the outfit behind him. But Roe just laughed at him, vowing never knuckle under to any white gangster. On one occasion, rumors swirled that Teddy Roe had narrowly escaped a kidnapping. Those in the know said Roe left the Boston Club at 8 p.m., got into his Cadillac and drove south toward Wabash. As he approached 47th Street, he noticed a car was following him. He turned east and floored his car's accelerator. Roe screeched his car to a halt near 47th and Vincennes Avenue, got out and started running. The sedan following him pulled up the curb. 4 men jumped out and gave chase, but Roe managed to escape through an alley. With his fellow policy operators going down one by one as a result of the outfit onslaught, Roe became the policy man in Chicago, and he took over all of the gambling between Roosevelt and Halstead streets. By now, he was making more than $1 million annually, and Chicago's black community loved him for his brave stand against the white mob. It made him a folk hero. Indeed, Roe had no intention of cutting and running. The outfit tried to work out a deal with him, but he refused, even after his men started showing up dead in alleyways. Shots were that put his wife and kids in danger were fired and his house bombed. Giancana tried to sweeten the proposed departure, and make an offer Roe could not refuse. The emerging godfather personally met with Roe, and offered him $250,000 in cash to quit the policy racket. "I'd rather die first," Roe told Mooney. "Well, my friend, you just might," Giancana replied. Finally, Giancana met with his chief lieutenant Fat Lenny, and some of his soldiers in early June 1951 on the Lady Lou, a yacht the gang rented and moored at Brigham Harbor. They worked out a simple plan: follow Roe to determine his schedule, and then kidnap him. Once a hefty ransom was paid, kill him. Shortly after midnight on June 19, 1951, Caivano and 3 other mobsters began tailing Roe, who was traveling in his Lincoln. They flashed the lights of their sedan, sped up and ordered Roe to pull his car to the side of the road, on the crowded South Parkway. The mobsters got out of their car and walked toward Roe's Lincoln. They identified themselves as state attorney police. "Show me identification," Roe demanded. "How do I know?" But the would-be kidnappers failed to produce any identification. They jumped Roe and tried to drag him out of the car. Roe was a cautious man and he always carried a gun. He pulled it out and started shooting. Caivano was hit with a bullet to the temple, that tripped through his brain and killed him. A bullet hit another of Roe's assailants in the shoulder. The mobsters scrambled back to their car and fled. When the police arrived, they found Fat Lenny's lifeless body lying on the street looking like a dead beached whale. Roe was reportedly hiding in the bushes. There were no witnesses and the subsequent investigation uncovered no hard evidence about what had really happened. The police booked Roe for murder and put him extra heavy guard in Cook County Jail, following reports that he might be whacked in his cell. To thwart any plot to poison him, Roe's meals were especially prepared outside the jail. Roe was arrested, but, soon after, the charges were dropped and the legend of Teddy Roe, the Robin Hood of the South Side, mushroomed. Roe thumped his chest by repeating his vow to the press, "They'll have to kill me to take me." The killing of Fat Lenny shocked the mob. It was not used to being challenged and having its murder plots go haywire, let alone to have some Southside black punk take out one of their own. On the night of August 4, 1952, 2 men parked their gray 1950 Chevy behind tow signboards in a vacant lot across the street from Roe's home at 5239 Michigan Avenue. 15 minutes later, the Chevy backed out of its hiding spot and stopped at a red light 53rd and Michigan Avenue. Joseph Turner, a black service station attendant, noticed the Chevy and thought the occupants were policemen checking for speeders. He strolled close to Chevy and asked, "Are you guys checking cars?" No, everything is all right," one of passengers in the car assured him. Turner walked back to the station. In a few minutes, he quit work for the day and went home. At 10:55 p.m. Roe told his wife, Carrie, he was leaving the house, but did not say where he was going. A few minutes later, 5 shots rang out. Carrie ran to the window and shouted, "Teddy!" No answer. She called the police and ran out of the house. To her horror, her husband's bloody body lay sprawled in the street. 5 blasts from a 12-gauge shotgun had hit Roe in the back, face and jaw. He was packing a revolver, but he did not have a chance to pull it out and defend himself. Roe was pronounced dead at the scene. Ironically, an ambulance took Roe's body to Providence Hospital, the same hospital to which medics took Fat Lenny after Roe shot him. The hit was front-page news in Chicago and a sensation on its south side. At 53rd and Michigan, young newsboys hawked their papers, shouting, "The king is dead." Police had no clues in the killing, and its investigators could not agree on who killed Roe. The outfits hired assassins or independent racketeers, determined to move in on the last lucrative black-controlled policy wheel. A year later, a police spokesman insisted, "The Theodore Roe investigation is very much alive as far as we're concerned." But the trail was as cold as Chicago in January, and the murder was never solved. It remained one of the estimated 300 unsolved organized crime slayings in Chicago that had stymied police for nearly a half-century since the rise of Al Capone.
6. Kevin Hanrahan. One just walked out of jail. The other just went back in. Both are suspects in the unsolved September 1992 murder of New England mob associate Kevin Hanrahan, a feared Irish enforcer and collector for the Patriarca crime family, for well over a decade slaying gangland style in Providence's historically Mafia-run Federal Hill neighborhood, seen above. Per exclusive gangster report sources, 75-year-old New England mob captain Anthony, the Saint, Street Law Ron, and 83-year-old former Patriarca syndicate boss Francis, Cadillac Frank, Salim are considered top suspects in arranging the Hanrahan hit, which according to Ace Rhode Island mobologist and award-winning television reporter Tim White of WPRI Target 12 News back in August, is getting a fresh look from federal and state investigators these days. White previously reported two FBI informants have told the government that Salim ordered Hanrahan's murder because of Hanrahan's attempted extortion of an already protected bookmaker operating in southeastern Massachusetts. The bookie that the tall, broad-shouldered and quick-tempered Hanrahan was trying to shake down belonged to Street Laron, per federal court filings. The Saint accepted a large payment of cash from the bookie in the 48 hours before Hanrahan was clipped, according to court records. Street Laron got released from a 10-year prison stint for extortion and attempted murder in October. Salim, who headed the Mafia and New England Mafia for the first half of the 1990s, and entered the Witness Protection Program in 1999, was arrested this past summer for his alleged role in another mob execution, the May 1993 murder of Boston nightclub impresario and FBI informant Stevie DeSaro, a partner of Salim's in a Southie bar and live music venue called The Channel. A law enforcement source tells Gangster Report Salim's former underboss Robert "Bobby the Cigar" DeLuca recently provided new details surrounding the Hanrahan hit, after being pulled out of the Witness Protection Program back in July, and charged with lying to investigators in his initial 2011 cooperation debriefing about his knowledge of the DeSaro slaying. The 71-year-old DeLuca cut another deal for himself, and has admitted to burying DeSaro's body in Providence, where he acted as the Boston station Salim's representative, until Cadillac Frank was imprisoned in 1995. DeLuca and Street Laron, another Salim loyalist headquartered in Providence, experienced a falling out in the subsequent years, resulting in the Saint getting convicted behind bars in 2010, for trying to take a murder contract out on his rival. Street Laron offered the job to 3 different FBI informants. Another Maine lieutenant of Cadillac Franks in Rhode Island, and sometimes Connecticut, was strapping Kevin Hanrahan, who at only 39 years old was already a legendary leg breaker and hit men in East Coast underworld circles. When he was 22 he was shot at a popular night spot in Providence called Club Aries, and refused to identify the assailant to police, cementing his reputation as a stand-up guy. Hanrahan was suspected in taking part in at least a half-dozen mob murders, attempted murders and conspiracies, including the 1982 gangland homicide of Providence wise guy Raymond "Slick Ray" Vecchio, inside Vincent's Italian restaurant in Federal Hill, literally steps away from where he would meet his own fate a decade later, and the 1984 killing of Joan Carroll, a female co-conspirator of his in a narcotics ring, found strangled to death on the side of a Massachusetts road. He was charged in the Carroll murder, but beat the case. Informants told authorities Hanrahan gritted Caroline's side a North Attleboro, Massachusetts hotel room. Not long into Salim's reign as Don, Hanrahan, according to sources, began to chafe under his leadership methods. He complained to associates that Salim and his inner circle were greedy and that he was being undercompensated for his services. At the same time, Street Laron began butting heads with an extortion victim of his who sought to stop paying protection, or at least lower his tribute installments on his bookmaking activities. In the days after Labor Day 1992, according to federal court documents, Hanrahan approached the Saints' booking bookie and told him that he now belonged to him, and that he owed him $100,000 in bank compensation. The bookie went to Street Laron for help, and was sent to see seasoned mob associate Gordon O'Brien, who looked after the Saints' territory in Taunton, Massachusetts, where the bookie operated. With the bookie present at his house, O'Brien, since deceased, phoned Salim in Boston, and appraised him of the issue. The bookie, who went on to become an FBI informant, was ordered to deliver Street Laron $25,000, which he did on September 16, 1992, and resumed protection payments of $300 per week on his sports gambling business, which he did as well. He was told he didn't need to worry about Hanrahan anymore. 2 days later nobody did. Late on the evening of September 18, 1992, Hanrahan was shot at point-blank range in the face and head by a pair of assassins as he walked on Atwells Avenue in the heart of Federal Hill en route to pick up what he thought was a big score. Hanrahan was felled at the corner of Atwells and Pequot, and died at the hospital shortly thereafter. Earlier in the evening, he dined with prominent Providence mobster Ronnie Coppola at the Arch, an upscale Federal Hill eatery, and bragged to the crowded table he had a big score in the works. According to people at the meal, Hanrahan made plans to meet Coppola and his entourage at nearby Jimmy Birchfield's classic restaurant for an after-hours drink following a meeting he had. Hanrahan never returned from the meeting and Coppola was seen congregating with Bobby the Cigar DeLuca and fellow New England mob power Edward "Little Eddie" Lotto in a booth at Birchfield's instead in the minutes after Hanrahan was shot. Lotto, 69, is currently in prison for extortion. Coppola was DeLuca's top lieutenant. DeLuca and Coppola were both groomed in the mob world by longtime Patriarca Clan Providence capo Edward "Eddie" Mulligan Romano. Coppola was killed in the spring of 1994, shot in a dispute over a card game. Salim, O'Brien and Hanrahan had been indicted together in 1990 in kidnapping conspiracy. When he was arrested in August, Cadillac Frank was living in suburban Atlanta under the alias Richard Parker. DeLuca pled guilty to conspiracy in the Hanrahan murder late last week.
7. Donald Kroski. With all the improvements made to Sandy Hook Center, to give that little business district the air of quaint New England gentility, it is hard to believe that a mere 35 years ago, the same spot was the scene to rival that of the O'Caker Owl. When the shooting was over, 2 men lay dead and another was in critical condition, in the backyard of the Sandy Hook Hotel at 109 Churchill Road, just across from the Sandy Hook Diner. The incident was one of the most violent episodes in the town's history, and for years was recognized as an iconic part of Sandy Hook's past. It began when 49-year-old Donald Kroski refused to move. For a year he had rented the old hotel and ran the village cafe on its lower level. His lease had an option to buy at the end of the year, but in July, the owner decided he had a better offer and proceeded to force Kroski out, first by seeing that his liquor license was revoked, and later by threats. On the Monday before the shooting, he received a telephone call from some Bridgeport toughs warning him to vacate the hotel by Thursday or face the consequences. Thursday, July 31, 1975, Don and Kroski spent the morning locked in his cafe, crouching behind the bar. At 12:10, a car parked in front of the hotel, and 3 men got out. Going to the rear of the building, they proceeded to pick the lock of the cafe entrance. Exactly what followed will never be fully known, as the various newspaper accounts indicate. They all agree a series of shots were heard, although the witnesses disagreed widely on how many. Kroski called the police, and when they arrived, they found the first man lying dead just inside the door with a large jackknife at his side. Another was face down in the backyard, also dead, and a third, just a few feet further, was face down in critical condition. None of the men carried firearms, but had been shot by a .44 Magnum carbine Kroski owned. The men who were sent to evict Kroski were widely assumed to be members of the Hells Angels, because they sported tattoos on their arms of a skull with the words Hells Angels below. The head of the motorcycle gang, interviewed in Bridgeport, said the men were not wearing gang colors, and did not have their leather jackets with the gang's insignia painted on the back, so they were not on official Hells Angels business. During questioning, it came out that the cafe was a favorite haunt of a rival gang, and Kroski was known to say they were his people. Kroski was acquitted of the murders on the grounds of self-defense, but the cafe proprietor was not completely free. After the dead men's friends went looking for him, he frequently changed his route home to Trumbull, but about a year later, his luck ran out. While stopped at a traffic light, 2 motorcyclists pulled up on either side of him, and shot him to death. To this day, no one has ever been arrested for Kroski's slaying.
8. Nicola Campolongo. Mafia killings don't typically shock Italians. As disturbing as the occasional hit may be, the tragedy usually affects only friends and families of the victims. But a cold-blooded, point-blank killing this month, in southern Italy, has a nation grieving, for a 3-year-old child. Nicola Coco Campolongo was shot in the head along with his grandfather, Giuseppe Iannocelli, and his grandfather's 27-year-old companion, victims of an apparent mob hit over money. Their bodies were found January 19 in a burned-out Fiat Punto on the outskirts of Cosenza, in southern Italy's Calabria region. Iannocelli, who was serving a drug-related sentence on house arrest, appeared to be the target of the hit. In all my years investigating organized crime murders, none has been as horrific as this one, lead prosecutor Franco Giacomantonio told CNN. It is unimaginable that a child can be made to pay for the crimes of his parents. The killing even caught the attention of Pope Francis, who called Coco's death unprecedented. He asked worshippers at his Sunday address to say a prayer for Coco, and called on the boy's killers to repent for their crimes. Coco's 24-year-old mother, Antonia Iannicelli, didn't attend her son's funeral. She's serving a 4-year jail sentence for the possession and sale of drugs. Police feared members of the powerful 'Ndrangheta crime organization, believed to be behind the killings, would target Iannicelli if she attended. Her 2 other children, ages 4 and 5, were moved to protective custody in another region of Italy. Iannicelli will be allowed to serve out the rest of her sentence, on house arrest with her surviving children. The killing of such a young child has sparked debate in Italy, about how to protect children growing up in the shadow of the country's crime syndicates in the impoverished South. Coco was just an infant when his mother began serving her jail sentence. On Tuesday, Francesco Tallarico, head of the regional government in Calabria, wrote a letter to the president of Italy's National Observatory of the Rights of Minors, urging the group to lift the veil of silence that often accompanies mafia crimes, and to seriously investigate what can be done to protect the future of at-risk children like Coco. Coco's mother was already serving her 2nd prison term for drug crimes tied to 'Ndrangheta, one of the most powerful organized crime syndicates in the world, according to Francesco Forgione, head of Italy's Parliamentary Anti-Mafia Commission. Coco's mother is the first victim of the system, Tallarico told CNN. Her son had little chance to escape that life. In the wake of Coco's killing, Interior Minister Alfano Angelino and National Police Chief Alessandro Pansa signed an emergency protocol in the child's name, to ensure the protection of children's rights. We need to make sure the protocol does not forget children, who are growing up in vulnerable situations outside the law, who may be victims or witnesses to crimes. We need to make sure Coco is the last child ever killed like this, Pansa said. No suspects have been named in the triple homicide, but Giacomo Antonio believes it is likely connected to the region's drug trade.
9. Daniel Morgan. It is Britain's biggest unsolved murder, and described by a senior police officer as the pivotal crime of the times. It plunges into the heart of what former Prime Minister Gordon Brown called the criminal media nexus exposed by the hacking and bribes scandal that engulfed Trooper Murdoch's British tabloid titles. Only on this occasion the crimes went well beyond privacy intrusion and corrupt payments to a brutal killing. On Friday, Home Secretary Theresa May announced a judge-led public inquiry into the murder of Daniel Morgan, who was found with an axe embedded in his head in a South London car park in 1987. The panel of experts will examine not only the police corruption that sabotaged 5 successive police investigations and caused the subsequent murder trial to collapse, but also the connections between private investigators, police officers and journalists at the News of the World, and other parts of the media, and corruption involved in the linkages between them. Daniel Morgan ran a successful private investigations agency, Southern Investigations, with Jonathan Rees in the 1980s. However, as explained to the Daily Beast by his brother Alistair, Daniel had become suspicious of his business partner, and concerned about police corruption. He was preparing to expose local police officers to the now shuttered News of the World, according to another colleague. But after a meeting with Rees, Daniel was murdered. One of the officers to first investigate the murder, Sid Fillery, left the police and took over Daniel's role at Southern Investigations. Over the next 2 decades Fillery and Rees formed one of the most prolific private detective agencies working for the British press, and established what the investigative journalists Nick Davis and Vikram Dodd described as an empire of corruption. According to The Guardian, they provided material, mainly for News of the World, through a variety of illegal means, including paying police officers for confidential records, obtaining phone records, care registration details, banks account details, and allegedly using Trojan horse emails to hack computers. According to 2 sources, the firm commissioned burglaries to obtain material for journalists. A senior police source described the Morgan murder and the Rees-Fillery partnership as the origin of the illegal practices exposed by the hacking scandal. Their relationship with News of the World, the source said, was without question the maternity ward where the Dark Hearts were born. Meanwhile, Southern Investigations was still subject to no less than 5 police investigations at a cost of some $50 million. The police planted an undercover officer in the agency, and had the offices bugged. However, most of the material has never been released. Further police investigations were deliberately sabotaged by employees of News of the World. David Cook, who led 2 of inquiries, had his phone hacked by the tabloid, his house watched, and his family followed. As his former wife and police officer Jackie Hames explained to the Levson Inquiry Press Ethics last year, the surveillance was due to collusion between people at News of the World and those suspected of the murder. When confronted about the surveillance, then editor of News of the World Rebecca Brooks claimed it was a legitimate investigation to see if Cook and Hames were having an affair, though they had children and had been married for years. Reese was sentenced for 7 years over a separate crime in 2000, but was promptly rehired upon his release by Andy Coulson, an editor who had taken over from Brooks as editor of News of the World, and would soon move over to become Prime Minister David Cameron's press supremo. According to Alistair Morgan, the terms of reference of the new inquiry have been under discussion for months. It was only the hacking scandal, and the Levson inquiry which brought this back into the spotlight, he told the Daily Beast. Modeled on the recent Hillsborough panel, which last year revealed police misconduct and press lies about the death of 96 Liverpool supporters at a football stadium in the 1989, Alistair hopes the inquiry will at least expose the cover-up, although, because of the legal nightmares of previous investigations, he doubted those behind the murder would ever be brought to justice. David Cook, who ran 2 of the murder inquiries, compared the Morgan case to another notorious South London murder, the racist killing of black teenager Stephen Lawrence in 1996, which also took decades to come to justice, but instead of race being the issue, this time it is about corruption. This whole saga could best be described as an iceberg, Cook told the Daily Beast. What you see on the surface is nothing to what lies underneath. Campaigning Labour MP Tom Watson, a key figure in exposing the phone hacking scandal through Parliament, believes that the new inquiry, with power to examine all the police documents going back to 1987, could prove historic. By the end of this process we should know more about a very opaque period in British history when corrupt police, private investigators, and tabloid journalists worked together, he said. Watson told the Daily Beast he was particularly interested in what happened to the material garnered in the late 1990s, concerning the relationship between Southern Investigations and News of the World. He hoped there will be a full investigation of what senior officers really knew back then. Above all, however, Watson wanted to pay tribute to the Morgan family, for their often lonely and unheard campaign. 2 decades ago Alistair Morgan made solemn promise to his dead brother, that he would not rest until the corruption was exposed. As the public inquiry gets underway later this year, his pledge may at last be honored.